What if hunger wasn't just a feeling, but a curse? Not the hunger you feel when you skip a meal, not the kind that makes your stomach growl or your hands tremble, but something ancient, something cold, something that takes root in your soul and never lets go. In the frozen forests of North America, where snow buries the earth and silence screams louder than wind, people once whispered of a creature that feeds on more than flesh. It feeds on desperation, on loneliness, on the final moments of humanity before they are lost to something far darker. They call it the Wendigo. It was said to begin as a person, just like you, just like me. But when starvation took hold and the snow offered no mercy, they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They turned their own. And the moment they tasted human flesh, they were no longer human. The Wendigo is more than a monster. It's a warning, a reminder of what waits when survival costs too much. Its body is stretched, gaunt, like the bones are trying to tear free. Its eyes sink, its voice vanishes, and all that remains is a hunger that grows louder than thought itself. This isn't just a myth told around campfires. It's a shadow burned into the memory of cultures who saw something they couldn't explain, but couldn't forget. So ask yourself, if the snow fell, the food ran out, and the cold crept in, how far would you go? And when the hunger came, would you still be you? Before the Wendigo became a creature of horror games and midnight stories, it was something far older. It lived in the beliefs of the Algonquian-speaking peoples, indigenous tribes who thrived in the cold, vast forests of what we now call Canada and the northern United States. These were people of the land. They knew the rhythm of the seasons, the signs in the snow, the warning in the wind. They had seen what starvation could do. They had felt winter not as a poetic stillness, but as a living, breathing danger. The Wendigo was not entertainment. It was a spiritual truth, a monster, yes, but one born not from fantasy, but from fear. In these cultures, the Wendigo wasn't simply a flesh-eating beast. It was a spirit of hunger. It could possess a person. It could linger at the edge of a camp, waiting for weakness. It symbolized greed, gluttony, and the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. And the transformation wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was subtle. A man might begin hoarding food, even as his neighbors starved. A hunter might disappear into the woods and return changed, cold, distant, his eyes no longer meeting yours. The Wendigo was in the act, but also in the aftermath. In the guilt, the shame, the silence. According to the legends, those who gave in to the Wendigo's temptation, those who consumed human flesh in the grip of desperation, were doomed to become one. Their hearts would turn to ice, their souls would rot, their hunger would never end. The more they ate, the emptier they became. And their bodies would reflect this paradox, growing larger, towering above others, but with skin stretched thin like parchment, bones jutting out as if the body itself rejected the monstrous hunger inside. But what made the Wendigo so terrifying wasn't just what it was where it came from. Because winter in these regions was brutal. Temperatures plunged below zero. Storms could isolate families for weeks. Hunting could fail. Crops could die under sheets of ice. And in these desperate conditions, with the world turned white and dead and silent, choices became harder. Morality bent. And sometimes it broke. European colonizers, upon encountering these stories, often dismissed them as superstition. But to the Algonquian peoples, the Wendigo explained something very real, how someone could survive the winter, but lose their humanity in the process. It wasn't just an external threat, it was internal, a test, a warning etched into the heart of a people who understood that survival wasn't just about food or shelter, it was about the soul. Over time, these stories evolved. Different tribes had different variations. Some described the Wendigo as a skeletal giant with glowing eyes and a voice like a dying wind. Others said it mimicked human voices to lure victims into the trees. And some didn't describe it as a beast at all, but as a sickness, one that could spread if not confronted, a psychological contagion, a moral decay. This interpretation would later evolve into what some modern researchers call Wendigo psychosis, a controversial and debated condition said to afflict individuals in isolated, starvation-prone communities. A person might develop an intense craving for human flesh, along with the belief that they were transforming into a Wendigo. Whether this was a true psychiatric disorder, a cultural metaphor, or a colonial misreading is still debated. But the fact that such a term even exists shows just how deeply the legend has embedded itself into our understanding of extremity and survival. The Wendigo is not just a creature of folklore. It's a reflection of human fear. Fear of isolation, of losing control, of being consumed by need. In the silence of winter, when the world feels forgotten, when hunger gnaws at the edges of sanity, the Wendigo waits, not just in the woods, but within. So when the snow begins to fall and the cold sets in, remember this. Some monsters don't come from the dark. They grow in the silence. They are born from need, and they wear our faces. If you were to see it, truly see it, you might not understand what you were looking at. The Wendigo is not just horrifying, it's unnatural. Every part of its body tells a story, one of hunger, distortion, and transformation. Legends describe the Wendigo as towering. Some say it stands over 15 feet tall, its limbs stretched long and thin as if pulled by invisible strings. Its arms dangle past its knees, ending in clawed fingers more suited to tearing than holding. Its legs are gaunt, misshapen, sometimes bent backward like a deer's. Its feet leave behind twisted tracks in the snow, deep, wide, and unmistakably wrong. Its body is skeletal, almost translucent. You can see where the bones push against its skin, which hangs loose and pale like dead bark peeling from a tree. Some versions say the skin is grayish-blue, cracked from the cold, tight over the bones like something mummified in frost. Others describe it as stretched too thin, as if the creature is too large for its own skin, always expanding, always consuming. But perhaps the most chilling part is its face, eyes sunk deep into the sockets, burning faintly with a cold, inhuman glow. There's no emotion, only the endless void of need. Its mouth is wide, torn at the corners, jagged with teeth not made for eating, but for ripping. Some accounts say the mouth is frozen in a permanent grimace, cracked from use, bloodied by its own hunger. You can't look at it and feel pity. You can't look at it and feel empathy. You look and you understand. This is hunger made flesh. In more recent interpretations, especially those filtered through pop culture, the Wendigo sometimes appears with antlers or the skull of a stag. This imagery wasn't part of many original native accounts, but it has taken root in the modern imagination. The deer, symbol of innocence, nature, vulnerability, corrupted into a crown of death. It creates a silhouette that is both majestic and horrific, a twisted reflection of the wilderness itself, beautiful, powerful, and indifferent to your suffering. But the Wendigo is not just what it looks like. It's what it does. It hunts in silence. You won't hear it until it's too late. It doesn't need to chase. Cold never moves fast. It creeps, it waits, it watches. It thrives in isolation, feeding not just on flesh, but on fear, on the breakdown of the mind. It is patient, and that patience is its greatest weapon. And once it finds you, there's no reasoning. The Wendigo does not negotiate. It does not kill out of anger. It consumes because it must, because the hunger never ends. Some believe that each time it eats, it grows, but so does its hunger. The more it feeds, the emptier it becomes. It is a paradox, a creature that grows stronger and hollower at the same time. That is the true horror, not its claws or its speed or its strength, but the fact that it cannot stop, that it is defined by its inability to be satisfied. In a way, the Wendigo is the physical embodiment of addiction, of gluttony, of the insatiable thirst that drives people to ruin. And like addiction, it warps not just the body, but the spirit. The transformation into a Wendigo isn't only external, it's a collapse from within. A loss of self so complete that the human inside is not just gone, it never existed. This is what separates the Wendigo from other mythical beasts. Dragons are powerful, vampires seductive, werewolves tragic, But the Wendigo is something else. It is shame. It is the moment you betray everything you are just to survive. It is the cost of staying alive when all that made you human has already died. And perhaps that's why it endures. Why? Even today, the Wendigo still haunts forests, stories, and screens. Because at its core, the Wendigo isn't about a monster out there in the woods. It's about the monster that might be hiding in us. The one that wakes up when we are cold, alone, desperate, the one that whispers just one bite. Not every monster lives in the forest. Some are born in silence. They rise when the fire dies down, when the food runs out, and when the mind begins to slip into places it was never meant to go. The Wendigo is not always a creature you see. Sometimes it's a voice, a thought, a temptation. And by the time you realize it's there, it may already be too late. In the traditional stories of the Algonquian peoples, the Wendigo wasn't just an external threat. It could also possess a person, enter them like a chill in the bones, a shadow in the back of the mind. This wasn't possession in the way we might imagine with demons or ghosts. It was more subtle. It began with thoughts, with cravings, with isolation. The Wendigo would find someone who was alone, afraid, or on the edge of desperation and whisper. And those whispers weren't screams. They weren't loud or terrifying. They were calm, logical, persuasive. It didn't tell you to kill out of rage. It asked questions, quiet ones, dangerous ones. No one is coming. Just one bite. You have to survive. And when a person gave in, when they crossed that final line, they weren't the same anymore. The Wendigo didn't just live in them. It became them. Modern psychology has tried to understand this legend. In the 20th century, doctors and anthropologists identified a condition they called Wendigo psychosis, a controversial and now largely disputed diagnosis. It was said to afflict members of indigenous communities who developed an irrational craving for human flesh, along with the belief that they were becoming Wendigos. Some historians question whether this was ever a real mental illness or just a misinterpretation by colonial observers. Many point out that these so-called cases were rare, often poorly documented, and may have had more to do with cultural fear, social pressure, or misunderstandings of indigenous spirituality. But whether or not the psychosis was real, the fear behind it was. The legend of the Wendigo was never just about flesh and snow. It was about what happens when the mind unravels, when your thoughts betray you, when survival becomes more important than your soul. And that's something far more terrifying than a beast in the woods, because we've all heard that whisper in different forms, maybe not about flesh, but about giving in, about cutting corners, betraying trust, abandoning values just to survive, just to get ahead, just this once. That's what makes the Wendigo so haunting. It's not a creature that attacks from the outside. It's one that grows from within, from fear, from need, from isolation. And the more you feed it, the stronger it becomes. The Wendigo reminds us that the line between human and monster is thinner than we like to admit. That under the right circumstances, hunger, cold, fear, anyone might change. Might justify the unthinkable, might start to believe the whispers are their own thoughts. And once that happens, is there any coming back? In indigenous communities, stories of the Wendigo were not told just to scare children. They were warnings, ethical teachings. They reminded people of their responsibilities to each other, to share during hard times, to stay connected, to speak up when someone was withdrawing or changing, to never let the silence grow too thick, because that's when the Wendigo enters. In this way, the legend becomes a kind of psychological survival guide. It's not just about fending off monsters. It's about preserving humanity when everything else is falling apart. Because hunger is real, fear is real, but so is choice. The Wendigo offers an answer. A terrible, seductive answer to the question, what would you do to survive? And the scariest part isn't that people have asked that question. It's that some have answered yes. You might think the Wendigo is gone, a myth buried in snow, a tale told by firelight, something ancient belonging to another world and another time. But you'd be wrong. The Wendigo never truly left. It only changed shape. It moved from oral tradition into written lore, from ceremony into cinema, from sacred warning into popular horror. It was forgotten by some, but remembered by others. And in the shadows of modern storytelling, it found new life. For centuries, the Wendigo was a spiritual concept, deeply embedded in the beliefs of the Algonquian peoples. But when European settlers arrived, they didn't just bring weapons and trade, they brought misunderstanding. Many couldn't comprehend indigenous cosmology, and so they labeled the Wendigo as savage superstition or devil worship. These dismissals not only disrespected sacred traditions, but pushed the legend underground into silence. Yet the story refused to die. As the years passed, anthropologists and folklorists began documenting Wendigo tales, often through a colonial lens. The creature was sensationalized, exaggerated, stripped of its cultural context. It became a monster in the Western imagination, one that haunted the wilderness rather than the soul. And from there, it leapt into literature. One of the earliest and most influential depictions came in 1910 with Algernon Blackwood's chilling short story, The Wendigo. In it, the creature is portrayed as a mysterious force that stalks hunters in the Canadian wilderness. Blackwood's version emphasized isolation, madness, and transformation, ideas that echoed true to the spirit of the original myth, even as the details shifted. But it wasn't until the 20th and 21st centuries that the Wendigo exploded into popular culture. You'll find it in horror films like Ravenous, 1999, where cannibalism triggers a supernatural hunger, or in Pet Sematary, Stephen King's dark tale of death and resurrection, where the Wendigo lurks as an unseen force in the woods, feeding on grief and desperation. In TV series like Supernatural or Hannibal, the Wendigo is reimagined as both literal beast and symbolic curse, a reflection of the darkest aspects of the human condition. In the video game Until Dawn, the Wendigo is tied to a curse that transforms who resort to cannibalism into terrifying, emaciated monsters. Even Marvel Comics and Chilling Adventures of Sabrina have offered their own takes on the creature. But with every new appearance, something gets lost, and something else is added. The Wendigo becomes more monstrous, more cinematic. Fangs, gore. It's easier to sell a monster than a moral. Easier to show a beast chasing victims through the woods than to explore the quiet terror of a mind unraveling in the cold. And yet, despite these changes, the heart of the Wendigo still beats. Because whether it's in a traditional ceremony or a streaming series, the same themes echo: hunger, transformation, guilt, survival. The Wendigo endures because it speaks to something universal. The fear that we might lose ourselves, that in a moment of weakness, we might become something we don't recognize and can never undo. But there's another side to this story, a necessary one. In recent years, Indigenous creators and storytellers have been reclaiming the Wendigo. They've challenged the way it has been distorted, used, and commodified by mainstream media. For many, the Wendigo is not just a spooky legend. It is a sacred warning, a piece of cultural identity that deserves respect, not exploitation. Artists, writers, and educators are now working to tell the story right, to remind the world that the Wendigo isn't just a monster, it's a mirror, one that shows us what happens when we forget community, when we ignore ethics, when we value survival over humanity. So no, the Wendigo was never truly forgotten. It was pushed into the dark, yes, but that's exactly where it thrives, in silence, in shame, in the places we don't want to look. And now, as it returns to the spotlight, not just in entertainment, but in conversations about culture, history, and survival, we're reminded that its hunger was never just for flesh. It was for our memory, our fear, our silence. And like all things born in winter, it waits, not dead, just hidden, until we open the door again. What if the Wendigo was never meant to scare us with claws or teeth, but with something far worse? What if its true horror is the silence it leaves behind? When a person disappears into the snow, when a community loses one of its own, when the line between survival and savagery begins to blur. The Wendigo isn't just a monster of the forest. It's a mirror, one that asks, again and again, how far would you go to stay alive? And when the hunger sets in, not just for food, but for power, control, wealth, would you still recognize yourself? It's easy to look at the Wendigo as legend, as fiction, as a ghost of another world. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a story we keep telling because we're still living it. Because hunger never dies, it just changes form. So the next time you feel it, the ache for more, the whisper in the back of your mind, ask yourself, are you feeding the body or feeding the beast? If this story made you think twice about the monsters we carry within, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves the forgotten corners of myth and lore. Because here on the Myth Archive, we bring the stories buried in silence back into the light.